Friday, we traveled to Iowa and met up with Marco Rubio. We asked him about his escalating battle with Ted Cruz. Senator, what is this debate between you and Senator Cruz about on immigration?
Well, Ted was open and, in fact, was a supporter of legalizing people that were in this country illegally. He was during the debate on the Senate bill, and he was after the debate on the Senate bill. He made it clear on multiple occasions that he was against citizenship, but he was open to legalization. And then for weeks now on the campaign trail, he's refused to answer that question until the other night at the debate when he said that he did not intend to legalize people, again, trying to find himself some wiggle room. And so the bottom line is that there isn't that big a difference between him and I on how to approach immigration. And that was the point I was trying to make. This is a serious issue, and it needs to be confronted. And every Republican running for president has supported or supports legalization in some form or fashion of people that are in this country illegally. Even Donald Trump, he just wants to make them leave the country first, and then he'll legalize them.
Is it about immigration, or are you making a larger charge about Ted Cruz and whether he's being honest and truthful with people?
Well, I think Ted wanted to not talk about legalization during the primary and leave himself the option of being for it in a general election. And so, obviously, I think that's fair to the electorate. And it's not the first time. I mean, there are multiple issues in which he's tried to do these sorts of things. For example, when the free trade agreement was up, he wrote an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal. He wrote it with Paul Ryan. And just 3 days later, he flipped on it after, I don't know why, he got some pressure on the Fast Track Authority. He's done it on votes on farm issues. In fact, changed his vote on the floor of the Senate. So there's always some of that because new facts are presented. But I think my concern is that voters need to, if you're going to attack someone on a policy issue, you need to be clear about where you stand on the issue and where you've stood in the past.
So when voters are making their decision on this, should they be thinking about what does Ted Cruz think about immigration, or should they be making a larger question, what is Ted Cruz being honest with?
Well, I think when you spend your whole time telling people that you're a clear talker and you say what you mean and everyone else is a sellout, but you're the only purist, I think it's fair to say, well, hold on a second. I mean, here's where you've been in the past on some issues, and here's where you are now. The truth is everyone running on the Republican side supports strong conservative positions. We have some differences on some issues, and we should discuss those, like national security, for example. But when you run by telling everybody you're the only purist in the field, you're the only one that's always consistent conservative, well, I think then your record is going to have a light shown on it, and in this case has proven that, in fact, well after the immigration debate had ended, he was still talking about how he was open to legalizing people and how important it was to bring people out of the shadows and so forth.
How much of a national security issue do you think it is that there is now an open conversation in the Republican Party about banning Muslims from America, and that a majority of the party agrees with that idea? Right now, do you think that's a national security problem?
Well, the statements that people have made, it's not a serious policy proposal. And so it was made for the purposes of recapturing the headlines. I mean, Donald Trump had fallen out of the headlines, rightfully, because we had the largest terrorist attack in American history since 9/11. He wanted to get back in the headlines, and he came up with something spectacular and outrageous so that people would respond to it, and he could recapture the headlines. It's not a serious proposal. Ultimately, I think that all of this will pass, and it will be the rhetoric and the policies of the next president that will determine whether we are safer or not.
Because I was interested, Chairman Burr, Senate Intelligence Chairman, said it actually does have a real danger right now. It can be used as a recruitment tool from terrorists, and also what do Muslims feel like who live in the United States, that it might alienate them, which, as you know, is the precursor for potential
Well, ISIS, the primary recruitment tool that ISIS uses is that they are recruiting people to join their apocalyptic cause that's going to have this final showdown in the city of Dabiq against the West, and it's going to trigger this new era in world history. The second point is a valid one. We will need cooperation and work alongside the Americans, Muslim Americans in this country to identify areas where people are being radicalized or things they may see in their community. We are going to need to work with them, and most certainly there are very patriotic Muslim Americans who love this country and would love to share information with us to prevent these attacks. And so to the extent that rhetoric could prevent people from doing that or make them resistant to cooperating with law enforcement and intelligence agencies, that's problematic, of course.
Another debate you had with Senator Cruz on foreign policy was overseas. He said, quote, "We need to focus on killing bad guys, not getting stuck in Middle Eastern civil wars that don't keep America safe." What do you make of that critique?
Well, he's wrong, because civil wars in the Middle East have a direct impact on America. Take Syria for an example. The Syrian civil war was not started by the United States. It was started by the Syrian people themselves, particularly Sunnis, who wanted to remove Assad. My argument was, this thing is going to spiral out of control. If we don't empower the secular rebels on the ground, they're going to be killed, or they're going to be forced into exile. and a vacuum will be left, and it will be filled by radical jihadists, because that's who fills vacuums in the Middle East. Well, that's precisely what's happened. And the argument that Assad and we have no vested interest and he's not an enemy of America is wrong. For example, Assad is the reason why there's a refugee crisis. Why are there hundreds of thousands of refugees destabilizing Europe, tens of thousands trying to come to America? Because Assad is conducting an attack of sectarian cleansing. He is conducting a program of getting rid of all the Sunnis, and that is forcing hundreds of thousands of people to destabilize Europe and Jordan and trying to come into the United States.
But people are so afraid of, you take Assad out, then we're committed to having to take care of what's left afterward, because when we don't, it creates the kind of failed state.
Well, we're not going to take Assad out. The Syrian people are going to take Assad out. And I think the lesson of Libya is, if there is a civil war that's leading to this sort of vacuum, you want it to end as quickly as possible. The longer it lasts, the harder it's going to be to govern that country afterwards.
But the Powell rule, you break it, you bought it. Even if the Syrians are the ones who overthrow Assad, we're helping them, and by that little bit of help we give, puts us on the hook. Also, afterwards, if it's a failed state, the United States is on the hook.
But our involvement wouldn't have exacerbated the uncertainty. Without America firing a single bullet or providing a single weapon, there was going to be a civil war in Syria that was going to destabilize Syria and create a vacuum. And so our choice was, let it play out. If you let it play out, it leads to the vacuum, which leads to these ISIS fighters. Or do you do something to end it as quickly as possible so that vacuum isn't created? And that's the choice we had 3 years ago, and we didn't take it under this president.
You have a new ad that's running, and in the ad it says, quote, "All of us who feel out of place in our own country." Do you feel out of place in your own country?
I think people feel out of place in their own country for a number of reasons. Economically, we're in a country where you were told your whole life that if you go to school and you get a degree, you're guaranteed the American dream, or at least a shot at the American dream, and that's not happening. You have a country where people are told this is a country where you're going to be judged on your merits and on your hard work, and that's not happening. Increasingly, Americans feel out of place because it seems like the people who have access to power and influence win, and everybody else is left on the outside looking in. And then people that hold traditional values are often described as bigots and haters.
Who calls them that?
Oh my gosh, everybody on the left does. For example, if you do not support their definition of marriage.
But I mean, the word bigots and haters.
Absolutely.
Everybody, so you're the president? Who's calling them that?
Well, more certainly the president has on occasion said that people that don't support same-sex marriage are wrong. But in terms
wrong is different than
well,
bigot.
but in the broader left, I've been called a bigot for not supporting the definition of marriage.
When you say, though, the us who feel out of place, are you including yourself in that ad?
When it comes on the traditional values, absolutely. I have been called that before. In fact, this very week, I was called anti-Hispanic, anti-Latino by a group of, I don't know, obviously people from the left, funded from the left, who argue that unless we agree with them on everything, somehow we've betrayed our community. I mean, this is standard operating practice from the left.
Vladimir Putin says Donald Trump is a, quote, outstanding and talented personality.
No.
Is that an endorsement you want?
No, I don't. I don't want Vladimir. Vladimir Putin is a wily cost-benefit analysis political actor who is trying to have Russia recognized as a great global power on par with the United States, and who wants the world to return to a sphere of influence system of politics.
Donald Trump seemed to be honored by the praise from Putin.
He shouldn't be. Vladimir Putin is a person he's jailed and murdered journalists, political opponents. He bombed an apartment building as a pretext to attack the Chechens. He is responsible for the downing of that Malaysian airliner over Ukraine because he provided the anti-aircraft weaponry that was used for that. So this is a person who's done some horrifying things on the global stage. From a geopolitical, realistic level, we have to deal with him, but because he's the leader of an important country that, between them and us, control over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. But he is not someone who is going to go down in history as a great leader.
And Donald Trump, when mentioned those journalist killings, he said, well, I think our country does plenty of killing also.
Well, I haven't heard him make that statement. If he did, of course, it's outrageous. I don't know of a single documented instance in which the President of the United States has ever ordered the assassination of journalists who issue bad coverage of them or who have taken a different political line. We've entered a portion of this politics where nothing surprises me anymore, whether it's from Donald or some of the people watching.
All right, Senator Rubio, thank you so much.
Thank you.